All right, welcome everybody to Crystal Kyle and Friends. Today we have a special exclusive Christmas interview for you guys. So this one's going to be a little different. This is going to be available in video form for free to everybody. So if you like this kind of content, sign up on Substack. $5 a month will get you every single video interview for KKF in its totality. You can also sign up for free and listen to the full audio podcast, of course. But remember, we're true independent media, never talked to an advertiser, never done an ad read. So definitely support us if you can. But today is a super, super special interview because I have with me Congressman Ro Khanna, or as he'll be known forever from now on, the man who got the Epstein files released. So that's definitely a big deal. So Congressman Ro Khanna, first of all, thank you for joining me. Second of all, let me just say, Crystal made a good point to me right before I came on air here that the thing that you did that's so important is you pierced the aura of Trump's invincibility with this thing that you did on the Epstein files. So right off the jump here, on behalf of myself and everybody watching, let me just say thank you for that.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I believe in independent media, and you were a trailblazer on that. And that's the only reason Christmas Eve I'm doing an interview. We've been bombarded with all the traditional outlets, and I've declined given it's Christmas Eve. But I said, if it weren't for your journalism, there wouldn't be the same kind of progressive movement. And I appreciated the reason this coalition worked is the first time we've gotten MAGA folks, Republicans, actually willing to take on Trump. And for the longest time, our party has just been screaming at Trump. And my orientation has been, let's scream at the system. Let's scream at the corruption and the rot in the system. And if you scream at the corruption and the rot in the system, these billionaires and the Epstein class that were raping basically working class girls and that had impunity when these working class girls called the police, no one did anything. If you talk about the rot in the system, turns out you can get MAGA Republicans on your side fighting for justice. And that's the coalition we built. And that was Trump's kryptonite. It's what is causing the unraveling of the Trump presidency. Is at 36% in Gallup today. It's the first time now that Republicans are willing to question him. It turns out it's not about memeing and yelling at him or calling him a fascist. It's actually about building a coalition with his voters.
I'll handle the memeing and I'll handle the calling him a fascist. You can handle the serious legislative stuff. But let me ask you, how did you and Thomas Massie come up with the strategy that worked to get the Epstein files released? So you use this thing called a discharge petition. Tell everybody what that is and tell everybody why it worked.
Well, first of all, we've been in Congress about 9 years and we've done a lot of things that haven't worked. But they've been things of principle with these discharge petitions and war powers resolutions. Massie and I really bonded from my first year in Congress and when he was relatively junior because we were appalled at the president getting us into wars overseas without coming to Congress. And so we worked together, as you remember, on the Yemen war powers resolution. And Massie was instrumental in that to say that we shouldn't be refueling Saudi planes that were creating the biggest humanitarian disaster in Yemen. Before Gaza, that was the greatest humanitarian disaster. And Bernie Sanders and I, with Massie, passed the first war powers resolution in our history to stop that refueling in Saudi. We worked even when Biden was president, saying you can't just go strike Houthi ships without coming to Congress. We opposed this Congress, Donald Trump getting into a war in Iran. And so we were seen as kind of these mavericks. People would say, that's Khanna and Massie doing their thing. They're not going to get a majority. And when we started with this Epstein issue, we said, look, this should be a issue that crosses the divide. Neither of our party leaderships are going to go for it. Why don't we do this front and center and be for transparency, be for holding these elites accountable? And so Massie came to me and he said, do you mind if we do the bill together? Because I had an amendment in the House Rules Committee. He saw one Republican flipped on the Rules Committee, Ralph Norman, and he's an MIT guy, he's a mathematician. He said, well, if you could get one Republican to flip in a committee of about 15, chances are we could get quite a lot of Republicans to flip if you do the math in 435. And so we said, we'll do this bill together and that we'll do a discharge petition, meaning you need to get 218 signatures to actually get a vote. And he said, I'll get the Republicans. I'll get 4 or 5 Republicans. Can you get every one of the Democrats? Now, I know some people say, oh, that was simple getting 212 Democrats. Let me tell you, it's not easy to get everyone in your own party. You got to convince leadership to do it. I had to convince Steny Hoyer, who I'd called to step down and retire, to sign my discharge petition. I had to convince people who were running for governor who never wanted to show up in Congress because they had competitive races to sign the discharge petition. So I delivered the 212. Leadership got on board and helped. We delivered the 212, and Massey and I worked, and he delivered the Republicans. But we had to do things there too. Lauren Boebert says, "Okay, I'll sign the discharge petition, but I'm not waiting in line." So I went to one of my colleagues and said, "Can we please let her cut the line so she could sign the discharge petition?" So
Wow.
it was every vote mattered, and we got to 218, and then we got the thing to pass in the House and the Senate.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't it like fail a couple times before it passed? Didn't you hit a bunch of roadblocks before it finally passed?
Well, it failed to get to 218 a number of times. As it was getting to 218, Johnson shut down Congress early for summer recess. Then,
Mm.
as we were able to get it going again, Johnson refused to swear in Adelita Grijalva. He kept trying to delay this so that we didn't hit 218, so that the White House could put pressure on Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or Nancy Mace, force them off the discharge petition. They held. They were unable to do that. And when we brought in the survivors to the Capitol, that was where they started to lose the game. They realized then those women who signed the petition weren't dropping off. The media wasn't going to let this issue go, and we were relentless in driving it. That's another thing I think that is important in these things. Some people, they just say, okay, let's get the press release, we'll do the discharge petition, and then they forget about it. We fought, and we're about action and results. We were not going to let it slide. We were going to make sure we got to 218. We were going to make sure we got a vote. And it wasn't just about the House, it was about getting it through the Senate. It was about delivering. We had the survivors come to the Capitol twice to be able to do that.
So you called the initial DOJ release of some of the Epstein files, I believe it was about 1% of the Epstein files. You said it was, quote, a slap in the face to survivors because it was heavily redacted and there were a bunch of super important documents that were missing. Why do you think the Trump administration is withholding all of those files?
They're protecting people. In fact, they say as much. I mean, Donald Trump, one of the things about Trump is he's not exactly a poker face guy. He kind of tells you what he wants to do. And he says, well, there are a lot of people, prominent bankers, prominent lawyers are going to get hurt and their reputations are going to be destroyed. And I don't think that's right. And so that's the truth. I know because I've talked to survivors. They've talked to the FBI. They've named names of powerful people on at these banks who were visiting Epstein's rape island, who abused these girls, who covered it up. And they could easily release these FBI statements. And we know that the survivors name names there. I've talked to lawyers who were in those FBI interviews who heard those names being mentioned, and they're not releasing those files. Now, why are they not releasing those files? Because they don't want to hurt the quote unquote reputation of these men who they claim have never been charged, that there's no corroborating evidence. There's just the statement of the survivor, and they think it's unfair that those people would be hurt. So you have this absurd standard where the Department of Justice is actually protecting the men who raped and abused underage working class girls more than they're protecting the survivors themselves.
Do you think a lot of them are billionaire donors? Is that one of the reasons why they're being protected?
I I think some of them are billionaire donors, but it's not even that. It's kind of worse than that. It's just a class of people that are billionaires, are successful politicians, successful business leaders, successful finance guys, successful lawyers, that the elites kind of have an empathy with each other. I mean, it's almost not even instrumental. It's just they don't want to puncture this class. They don't want to puncture the class, even if some of them happen to be Democrats ultimately. They are protecting a group of people, a group of elite who think they play by a different set of rules. So there is class solidarity of this elite. It's the Epstein class. And those are the people being protected. And the people who were survivors, it's a class issue too. A lot of them were working class background, young girls, some of them daughters of immigrants. Many of them didn't have a father. They calculated who they could prey on, who they could intimidate. And it was disgusting. It's actually one of the biggest scandals in American history when this comes out. 1,200 victims, 1,200 survivors, and more. And decades, not just Trump, decades of their neglect in terms of not doing anything, while this class of people with extreme wealth is flying around to a rape island. I mean, just to visualize it, going to parties where 13 and 14-year-olds are being paraded naked and then saying, well, I didn't engage in sexual acts with these 13 and 14-year-olds. You were there at the party in certain cases watching them being paraded naked.
So we just learned that there were 10 co-conspirators. The DOJ had redacted that information, but people figured out how to unredact it because they redacted it in a very amateurish way. So based off that information, we now know they violated the law. They violated the law. So what's your reaction to that there are 10 co-conspirators and we know that they violated the law because, again, they're not protecting victims in that instance. They're protecting the criminals. They're protecting the elite cabal.
Well, first, they lied to Congress, right? I mean, they said, oh, there's no one other than Epstein who was involved in the abuse. That's just factually been disproven. There are at least 10 other people, conspirators, who weren't charged. All of this saying that there's a hoax and there's nothing beyond Epstein and Maxwell. Turns out, we know from the documents there were at least 10 people. And by the way, in my view, there are dozens of more people, men, who raped or covered up the rape that took place. Second, they've violated the Epstein Transparency Act. I mean, they can be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. Those people who say we don't have a remedy in the law don't understand the law. The remedy, according to the people who drafted it, is obstruction of justice. If you don't comply with a directive from Congress that is directing a certain compliance for justice, you're obstructing justice, and that carries long penalties. And I believe that Blanche and Bondi realized that they thought, okay, they're going to do this. Maybe they thought Massey and I were typical politicians. We'd go out and say, we got to win. We got the documents, do a celebratory press release. And our idea was not just to have some kind of celebratory win. We want the actual documents that is justice for survivors. So I think they were kind of taken off guard that we blasted them. And we said, we're going to hold you in contempt. We're going to refer you for criminal prosecution when there's a new administration. And we're going to hold you in contempt, meaning you're going to be personally fined $5,000 a day that every day you don't release these documents, Pam Bondi, Blanche. And by the way, we've got Republicans against you who are willing to vote for this. And suddenly they said, well, the MAGA influencers are more taken by Khanna and Massey than they are with us. And now they've been backpedaling. Just today, Christmas Eve, they announced they suddenly found 1 million more documents in Southern District of New York. I mean, come on. 6 months ago, they said the case was closed. There are no files. Now there are 1 million documents. So the one thing I appreciate what Crystal said, the one thing this shows is if you're creative and you take the fight to Trump, you can actually get them to backpedal and to fold. Instead, we've been such meek in our opposition, just kind of yelling into the wind, and we have allowed Trump to assert far more power than he ever should have. And this is showing that you can actually get Trump's Justice Department to scramble and fold and backtrack.
So we now know, as you pointed out, that Pam Bondi is violating both the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And you've discussed options like inherent contempt or even impeachment for the attorney general over noncompliance. So tell people the different ways you guys can go about holding them accountable for flagrantly violating the law.
The most obvious is to refer for criminal prosecution. Then I believe there needs to be accountability. And we've discussed this in the past. Accountability not just for Pam Bondi, accountability for the people who bombed innocent fishermen in the Caribbean, accountability for the thugs who engaged in conduct at ICE that split families or detained American citizens, accountability for those who gutted the USAID department unconstitutionally that killed people, poor people in Africa. We need accountability when we have a new administration. And Epstein Transparency Act and the violation of it needs to hold people accountable. So criminal prosecution, of course, Trump could pardon some people, and I imagine they're almost looking at that, and we need reform on the pardon power. But criminal prosecution has to be one of the key options. In the immediate term, contempt only requires the House of Representatives. It would be a $5,000 fine or $5,000 to $10,000 on Pam Bondi, on Blanche, every day they don't release the documents. And we require a committee of Congress, bipartisan committee, to review the documents of what should be redacted or not. You could also have the Southern District of New York put a special master to review those documents, but it should not be the Department of Justice. Impeachment requires a majority in the House and a the 2/3 in the Senate. Now, I'm open to that. And moving that. But the Senate, you already have some of these senators on the Sunday shows. I couldn't believe I was asked. Tim Kaine is saying it's premature, kind of, for what you're saying. I mean, Massey's not saying that. The Republicans in the House aren't saying that. And you got my own Margaret Brennan quoting Democratic senators against me. I was kind of taken a bit off guard. And but so yes, it's on the table. But the Senate has not exactly been a shining light in armor, or what, shining knight in armor. I mean, so we're counting on other institutions.
Yeah, they are so lazy and they forget that when you're a politician, you have to do politics. You have to fight. You have to make a case. Like, things are not self-explanatory. The arguments don't make themselves. And to have Tim Kaine say that, I saw that too, and I found it incredibly disappointing that we have basically the biggest cover-up in American history, probably one of the biggest scandals in American history. And what's he doing? He's laying in a chalk outline of himself. But that's why, Congressman, people look at you and they feel so reinvigorated and they're ready for the fight, because you're reminding people that Democrats can be fighters. Democrats can actually hold people accountable, and that's something I think they sincerely forgot.
Well, and I think they think of themselves, oh, I'm a serious person. He's not a serious guy. Really? I'm the one who's saying that you can't just violate the law and let rich and powerful people rape underage girls from the working class, and we're actually going to do something about it. And you're describing yourself as the serious statesman. So they just have this sense of that you can have a lack of political courage. You don't have to really rock the boat. You can still have cocktails with your Republican buddies after work, and everything will be fine, and the game just goes on. Well, the problem is the American people are livid and are angry as hell at the system, as what's gone on. And the guy who became president twice stood on the debate stage and started by saying, you know what? Everyone in my party sucks. Jeb Bush sucks. Marco Rubio sucks. Ted Cruz sucks. Let me tell you why all these politicians are bought and sold. I want to get away from the corruption. And he won twice. And now we're not willing to say, Donald Trump sucks. He's actually become part of the swamp that he railed against. And we're actually going to have your backs. We're going to be the party that fights for the abandoned and forgotten Americans. It's so simple to me, I guess, because I'm talking to real people. But you have never had a greater disconnect between the establishment and leadership of our party and the grassroots and what they want.
So I'm curious to hear from you about how the Epstein files are sort of a core reason as to why there's zero trust in institutions anymore. When I think back, I think of like the war in Iraq really made people lose faith in institutions. They understood George W. Bush and Dick Cheney flat out lied to get us into the Iraq war. There are a number of things I can point to, but the Epstein files really is at the heart. It's a core reason why there's zero trust in institutions anymore. Talk a little bit about that.
Totally agree. Look, I think the Iraq War was one of those instances. The failure to prosecute bankers who crashed the system with the Great Recession was one of those places. Gaza is another place where,
Right.
We're seeing the killings in front of our own eyes, and people are saying, no, 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 don't believe your own phones. And the Epstein class is the most egregious when you're putting aside ideology, because here you've got rich and powerful people, millionaires and billionaires, foreign heads of state, and they've literally created a rape island. I mean, think about this. You got an island there to rape and abuse underage girls, and they're targeting girls who are working class. And all these people are flying to this island and either raping these girls or covering up for that rape and thinking it's totally fine. And then they're trafficking girls, and some of them are saying, "Oh, well, they weren't under 18; they were 22." That's some of the excuse. I mean, some of them engaged in underage rape, and some of them were trafficking these girls. And this whole network is set up for decades. And these girls are in 1996 go to the FBI, Maria, and the FBI says don't investigate it, and they call her a liar. And until our Epstein Transparency Act forced the release of those documents for 30 years, the person who was the whistleblower in 1996 was called a liar. And other survivors who go to the FBI and the law enforcement are told, don't bother. No one's going to get Epstein. He's too connected. And so this goes on and go on through different presidents. The guy who's at the center of it, Jeffrey Epstein, doesn't have a 60-count indictment. It gets that dropped and gets a 2-count indictment where he gets a year in jail and even can be free on his own on his own feet while he's serving that term. And these billionaires still have, in some cases, buildings named after them.
Hmm.
They have, they're still on boards. They still have social prestige. The American people are saying, how in the world did this country allow this to happen? That we have an elite that is so out of touch with American values and plays by a different set of rules. And if the government is willing to lie about this elite, to protect this elite, well, what have they done to a system that has shafted the working class, that has offshore jobs, that has hollowed out the American dream? It's just a symbol for everything that is wrong about a rigged system in the country.
What message would you have for the survivors that you fought for? What would you say to them?
Thank you for your courage. Thank you for showing America that as a person, a citizen, you can still have a voice. They relived their trauma twice, coming to the steps of the Capitol to tell their stories. That you're making a difference. You're a group of people who are more than Democratic politicians or the media have actually been the kryptonite for the Trump administration. It's the first time the Trump administration is actually scared. You were responsible for passing something through the House and the Senate and forcing the president to sign it. We haven't had the kind of release you want, but we are getting now documents verifying that you were telling the truth, that you told the truth in 1996 when you blew the whistle, that there are co-conspirators, that it wasn't just Epstein, that the government has been lying to you about not of having released all the documents. You're winning. And we're going to fight this until we have justice. I don't care. Maybe it takes till the next president. I don't know. I think, though, it's going to be likely drip by drip until then. And then everything comes out on the day one of the next administration. That they appoint people like Brad Edwards, survivors' lawyers, to get this out. But I admire what they're going to do still, because some of them are talking about coming to the Capitol again. And what their fight for is not just for themselves, and it's not just for America's girls, and it's not just for survivors, and it's not just for the working class. They're fighting a corrupt system. They're fighting a rigged system. They're saying we've got to change the system in American politics that is elite impunity. And that is something that crosses progressive, MAGA, conservative, liberal. That's the central issue in this country.
So I wanted to bring up for you, here's some of the stuff that we know because of what you accomplished here. Trump was on Epstein's plane 8 times that we know of, and he went to the island with both Marla and his daughter, Tiffany. Epstein had a full drawer in his house that was dedicated to pictures of Trump, and they had posted that and then pulled them down when they realized they forgot to redact that because, of course, they were trying to illegally redact Trump's face. We learned that Mar-a-Lago was subpoenaed in the Ghislaine investigation, which means there was concern that Mar-a-Lago was being used as sort of a base for this human trafficking. Steve Bannon had a picture of Trump and Ghislaine on a plane in 2021, which is after his first term. This is decades after he said, "Oh, I cut them off. I had nothing to do with them." And so it's stuff like this, honestly, Congressman, that just absolutely blows my mind. And I mean, I could sit here for 20 minutes and ring off all these different facts about the stuff that you got released. There's pictures of Epstein with an underage girl in a helicopter. There's pictures of this billionaire dinner that Epstein hosted in 2011 with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and all of these super powerful, wealthy individuals who basically run the government through their campaign contributions. There's pictures of Epstein seemingly delivering an underage girl to this fat billionaire. I mean, this stuff is mind-blowing. What's your reaction to some of the stuff that we've learned? And we only have about 1% of the files have been released. What's your reaction to that?
I've said when it all comes out, it's going to shock the conscience of this country. It's going to be one of the biggest scandals in American history. And you're right. We only have 1%, and that 1% is more than has ever come out before. But what has it shown? I mean, as you have done your homework, I mean, it's shown that there are rich billionaires and rich people who were trafficking in these girls or visiting the rape island. It shows that Donald Trump was far more involved than he's letting on. He lied. I mean, during the 2024 campaign, saying that he was never on the Epstein plane. Literally lied about it, and now it comes out that he was on this plane multiple times. It shows that he's going to be mentioned in these files a lot, and we'll see if how much of that comes out. And it shows that there are co-conspirators that were never charged. And the question is, why weren't they charged? Why are these people being protected? Why are they still being protected? I mean, that's because you start out with that. And, I think there's a lot more embarrassing stuff about Trump. I don't think the smoking gun is about Trump. I think the smoking gun is that there are rich and powerful people other than Trump who are being protected by the government. And that should almost be of more concern to us that we have such an elite class that Donald Trump, who would sell out anyone who would to have political advantage, that he's not willing to sell these people out. That he is actually so concerned about this elite class. Why? And the American people are actually pretty wise, and they sense it. All the elites want to move on, right? Some of them distraction. This isn't serious. I've had people who like me, we thought you were more statesman. We thought you were an ideas guy. You're chasing conspiracy theories. What are you doing? Right? All the elites, they want to just move on. And they don't understand that this is the central moral issue. This is the central issue of trust. That it doesn't matter if I have complex economic ideas called economic patriotism about how to revitalize the economy. If the American people don't trust me to actually be for them, right? Like, who cares about my ideas? Who cares about my vision? If at a quote instinctual level they think, oh, this guy's just going to be for the elites. And that's what they don't understand, why Epstein is so important. We don't have trust in America. They have lost trust in governance. And the accountability for the Epstein class is about earning back that trust.
Before I let you go, Congressman, I want to talk a little bit about foreign policy. So you've came out and called what's happening in Gaza a genocide. You also have been relentless in calling out the Trump regime with their illegal attack on fishermen in the Caribbean, this attempted regime change in Venezuela. We now have over 100 people have been killed in the Caribbean. Over 20 boats have been bombed. You have, I think, 3 warships in the region, 15,000 troops. They're now illegally seizing oil tankers and just stealing them. And Trump is giving press conferences saying that he's stealing the oil. Like, we're just going to keep the oil. What is your reaction to living in this Twilight Zone-like scenario where we hopped in a time machine and went right back to 2002, where they're making all the dumb arguments about how, Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. They're now doing the new version of that is, Maduro's the head of this cartel, which is shipping drugs in the U.S., which is totally made up. It's totally false. What's your reaction to that? And how do we get other Democrats to fight like you fight? And how do we get the media to cover this in a better way where they're telling the truth about it?
Well, it's like Groundhog's Day. The American people, since 2008, have been voting for the anti-war candidate. They've been voting for the candidate who says, I don't want to get us into more endless wars. I don't want more dumb wars. And yet, when the candidate gets into power, they get surrounded by that same foreign policy establishment that gets us into these wars, whether it's Libya, whether it was 20 years in Afghanistan, whether it was Yemen, whether it is Gaza and now Venezuela. It's like the American people cannot break this foreign policy militaristic establishment. One of the reasons is because we don't have a clear opposition party for the Democrats when this happens. I mean, Schumer was on there saying, well, I don't know which way we should go in Venezuela because he's not been clear. How hard is it to say we don't want a regime change war in Venezuela? We don't want strikes on boats in the Caribbean without any constitutional authorization, that it is unconstitutional and that it is a waste of American tax dollars and that it is going to be it's going to backfire because it just emboldens the local populations. So I think part of the problem is we need a clarity in our own party to be the party that's against these overseas wars, to be the party that is for military restraint. And I and others are trying to move the party in that direction.
So, final question, Congressman. I have a lot of people in my audience now that have brought up to me that they see what you've been doing, they've been watching you, and they want you to run for president. And they're asking whether or not, I think you're going to run for president. And so now that I have you here with me, I'll ask you, is that something that's a possibility for you to run for president in 2028?
Well, I'm considering playing a national role. And the reason I'm considering it is that I believe a Democratic Party needs to be a bold, progressive party with clarity. We need to be for taxing billionaires. We need to be for Medicare for all. We need to be for childcare at $10 a day. We need to be against these overseas wars. We need to have the clarity to say what happened in Gaza was a genocide, that we're not going to have military sales to Israel, that we are going to fight this billionaire, corrupt Epstein class and have an actual working class agenda. And we're going to have free public college and 1,000 new free trade schools. I believe that a Democratic Party that isn't bold is not going to bring the change in this country that is needed. And so, what I do know is we need a strong progressive candidate. We'll see who's there, but I am not going to watch and sit on the sidelines for us to just run establishment reruns and have the same results for this country. And so I appreciate your viewers. I appreciate you and Crystal, and certainly I'm going to be seriously considering being part of the national conversation.
Well, I think a lot of people will be happy because one word I didn't hear in there was no. So I look forward to what comes out in the future. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Kyle. Merry Christmas.